Welcome to Shop Talk 2018, presented by Show Chic, who always puts the rider in first place.
So thank you all for coming. I'm happy to be invited here. This is my first shop talk. And we tried to do a little survey online about, I said, let's give everyone what they want. And so a little survey, and I guess it came back that people are interested in talking about contact and connection. So then I thought, well, where do I start this novel? We only have 2 hours tonight, so maybe we get through part of it. But my hope is that I can kind of touch on the major things that we focus on in our training, the primary issues I see when I teach, when I ride other horses, and then hopefully we can open it up. Hopefully you guys have come with some questions, concerns, and if not, maybe a couple of the ideas that I have will spark something for us to talk about. So the first thing I like to talk about when I teach is the difference for me between contact and connection. And I like to think of contact as the relationship between my hand and the horse's mouth. Connection is where it gets very tricky. Connection for me is what's coming from the horse's hind leg into my hand, which obviously comes through the mouth. And this is where a lot of people get confused and they complicate things and they focus on the mouth. And I like to think in my everyday training that my hands are where I receive information. This is where I'm getting told by my horse what is happening in the 75% of him that's behind me. And it's my job to listen and make decisions, and most of those choices and how I make decisions are actually solved with my legs. And this is what a lot of people don't realize, that a lot of the problems we see in the front 25% of the horse are caused by what's happening from the rider's leg and in the horse's hind legs. So we can maybe talk a little bit about bits later. I know there are 1,000,001 opinions and ideas and questions and that about bits. And we can open that discussion up later. I tend to think of bits as a little bit of not a last resort, but if my training is going really well and I'm still having a little problem in the mouth, then I'll maybe say it's an issue with the mouth. But before I go fussing and changing things all the time, which can really confuse the horse and put you back a step in your training, I make sure that what's happening between my leg and my hand is 100% before I go, changing things all the time. So let's see. The other big thing I often feel when I get on other people's horses, and it's hard to explain, is that lightness is different than a true lack of contact. And people get very confused by how much weight should be in my hand. I don't care, okay? That's up to you. What do you like to feel in your hand? And it's our job as trainers to train these horses to feel how the riders want them to feel. I like to feel quite a bit in my hand. Some people, a lot of my amateur students, maybe can't handle with their core what I can handle with mine. So it's my job to make those horses a bit lighter for them, a bit more reactive in front. But it's major confusion to think that a horse who's not touching or holding the bit in his mouth at all is light. Lack of contact is a little bit dicey for me in training, because what it tells me, that information I'm receiving in my hand when there's a lack of contact, means the horse is not coming to my hand at all from the hind leg. And if we can't control the hind legs, we can really get ourselves into a lot of danger. And as people continue in their training in dressage, we add all these tricks. We start teaching the horses flying changes and pirouettes and piaffe and all of these things that challenge their bodies. And it's very common that the horses don't learn to do it properly from the hind leg over their back. And what happens is a real lack of control from the rider's perspective. And it makes them trickier to ride. And I say, if you can't come into my barn and a first level rider can't get on my Grand Prix horse and make him go walk, trot, canter, there's a problem. If he's trickier than that to ride, I haven't done my job. Let's see. The next thing that also has to do a lot with connection is the word forward. And it's overused and misunderstood. And the major thing I spend my time talking about is, when it comes to forward, is that fast is not forward. And fast is sometimes very safe, but it's more of a reaction time to your leg that determines whether your horse is forward. And without a horse that's quick on your leg, you can't keep a steady feel in the contact, right, between your hand and the bit. So we're always constantly trying to create this, it's a bridge, but it's very elastic, and one thing has to stay connected to the other if we're going to make all of these seamless transitions. On the opposite side of lightness and lack of contact, we have a common complaint from people saying, my horse is too heavy. We hear that all the time. And heavy for me is maybe something that's uncomfortable for the riders. But more than that, what heavy tells me is that the horse is not really using his hind leg. And that is also different than a horse that is strong. Okay, so before we go breaking this down, I want to be clear that strong for me is not a problem. A horse that I can ride on a short rein that I feel like is going to take me to extended trot, if I let him on, then that's a safe feeling. I might have to do a lot of transitions back to make him wait for me, but strong is not so much a problem. Nobody ever complained about being pulled forward and up on their horse, right? It's the ones who have the horse diving down into the footing that say, I don't like this feeling. And so in all of these places along the track of connection, people often get afraid of what happens between their hand and the horse's mouth, the contact. And so they leave the reins long, and it a little bit opens the door for the connection to get lost. Somewhere in the hind leg, the horse is going along, but there's all this space between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth. I talk about it a lot like a kitchen sink. And if you turn your faucet on, where does the water go? Down the drain. You have to, in order to capture something, to create something, to collect anything, you have to plug that drain. And this is where we start talking about positive resistance and positive tension. That if there's never a boundary for the horses, they're not ever building anything. It's equivalent to getting on, say, an elliptical, and you have this tension. You can either turn it up or turn it down, and you can spend all day when that tension is turned down. You're not really burning any calories. You're certainly not getting any stronger, but you worked out for the day, didn't you? Right? But if you turn the tension up, it's not negative. No one's poking at you, but now you have to work a little bit. And that's where the horses really start to gain strength, connection, and self-carriage. And it's not uncommon for horses to struggle in this way. And I think that's another big misconception, is that in developing correct connection from the hind leg to the bridle to the hand is struggle for the horses. It's much more difficult than going in the way that they do in the field when they're on their own. And if it weren't more physically difficult, then why do they call this a sport, right? This is a big topic when it comes to Olympics and things like that. And I do believe that we are athletes as riders, and the horses are also athletes, but only if we do our job correctly. Let's see. We can talk about the training pyramid maybe a little bit. I know this can be a little controversial. People spend Lots of time, lots of articles, lots of blogs, lots of radio shows talking about why they disagree with the training pyramid. I would probably be one of those people. And I feel that the training pyramid is kind of a general idea to keep in your mind. I think some of the steps take a step above them to achieve the one below them, and so on, that they're almost kind of having a simultaneous development. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the training pyramid, it's easy for me to forget the order, but rhythm is on the bottom. We have relaxation, then they put connection, then we put impulsion, then straightness, and on the top, of course, is collection in our sport. Interesting for me, and probably the number one training issue that I see both in horses I ride and in students that I teach is straightness. And without straightness, I do not believe you can create impulsion. And so for me, if I had to build my own training pyramid, how my system works, I would put straightness at the bottom. No, I would put straightness for sure below impulsion. I just never in my time, which is not that long, but have I ever felt a horse that truly finds his hind leg when his shoulders are over here, his nose is over there, and his butt is somewhere else. So, and straightness is not to be confused with stiffness, okay? But often what is confused is bend and suppleness is very often confused with crookedness. And I always say, if adding bend makes your job as a rider more simple, then your horse is not really bending, he's just crooked. Bend should be, it's a higher degree of difficulty, which is why as we go up the levels of dressage, the half pass goes from the rail to center line, and then in the Grand Prix it becomes much more steep. It should be more difficult to maintain more bend. So if by adding that in the bridle, your horse suddenly goes a lot better, is more willing to go forward, then probably what you have is not true bend, but rather crookedness. And something we have to understand about horses and all animals, humans included, is that it's animal nature to get things done the easiest way possible. So when it comes to training, whether we're training dogs or boyfriends or horses, we have to take that into consideration when we ask them a difficult question. And I say, if you piled up a bunch of rocks or a bunch of dirt or something in front of me and you made it this wide, and you put my dinner on the other side of it, and then you took my leash off and you said, okay, Laura, go get your dinner. Which way am I going to go? I'm probably going to go around. It's a lot less effort. I still get my dinner, and I'm quite happy with myself that I figured out that little puzzle you gave me. Now, how do we, as riders and trainers, convince our horses to climb the mountain? And this is something we have to understand with patience, because it's not in their nature to try the most difficult way first. And understanding that resistance is saying, well, if I can't go around, then I'm going to go backwards. And not to panic when the horse is trying to find different solutions. And making sure that you're staying true to what we know is training. And that's why I say if adding what you think is bend makes the job easier for your horse, you have to really question if you've done that correctly. A big thing when it comes to confronting training issues that I see when I see a horse and rider I haven't seen before, the first thing I usually say is, okay, let's get him clear off your leg, right? We make sure he's reactive, we go back, we test it, and that would be a whole nother shop talk, which is actually the basics of connection. But then we say, okay, now he's great off your leg, he seems so honest, now shorten your reins. It's usually by about 5 miles. And then the rider shortens the reins all up, and now the horse won't go anywhere. Why? Because now he feels like, well, I can't go there. And I say a short rein, it prevents the rider from actually being able to pull back. If you pull back on a short rein, it's very obvious. And so I like short reins because you always feel like you can push. It prevents us from fussing around. And what it does for the horse is it takes away a lot of the ways that they cheat. It prevents the dog from running around the mound of dirt and limiting his options. And he goes, well, that's really difficult. And I wait. Okay, so most people, they take the short rein, and let's say, and I've done this before, I get on a horse and I think I'd like to feel that. So I get on and I shorten up the reins and we're in halt and everything feels fine. I go like this, and the mare ran backwards. And like 4, 5, 600 times around the arena, backwards, very fast, taking out fence rails as we went. And I'm just sitting there kind of like waiting, and the owner's mortified, standing in the middle of the arena, and she said, aren't you going to kick her? And I said, no, if I kick her, she's gonna rear. She's gonna feel so confronted by her world that I have just rocked, that then I'm going to make, in her mind, this task impossible. So we wait. And we waited and we waited, and finally she stood still. I said, good girl, and I clucked again. And we went backwards some more. And then, but over time, the mare understands that, okay, you can't go left, you can't drift to the right, but I only wait until I can say yes in my training. I never try to punish them for making the natural animal decision, but rather waiting for the horses when they're confronted with doing things the most difficult way possible, that I only wait until I can say yes. And we see this with all kinds of things. When we really focus on connection and keeping the horse true, from the hind leg to the hand on a contact, we're confronted with more problems. And that's simply because things are more difficult if the horse is really using their body properly, and it's not wrong for them to express that. And so, same thing. Let's say we're teaching flying changes, and I have my horse in really nice canter, we're very connected, the hind leg is jumping, I have a nice short rein. Now I'm gonna change it all. I'm gonna make this horse's world impossible, right? And now I'm gonna ask for a flying change. Oh God, what does she want? And I ask, and let's say first the horse doesn't do anything. So we maybe have to come with a little louder aid, a little bump with my leg, or a little touch with the stick. Now the horse kicks out, especially if it's a mare. So what do? A lot of people tend to get angry with the horse for kicking out. Okay, well that wasn't nice, that was rude, that wasn't submissive. This is a big word in our sport. But if we spend all of our time focusing on the mistakes and the bad behavior, it is such a fast way to spend your time at the bottom. If we can, and it's tough, as humans, especially dressage riders who are such type A personalities, to try to ignore all of these problems, we actually find ourselves on a much clearer path, staying true to this whole idea of connection. And when we start to allow ourselves to be talked into these other arguments where we say, no, don't kick out at my leg, no, don't run through my hand, no, don't run backwards, or whatever it is we're saying, when we say no, we are so distracted from what our job is actually in the saddle that we limit the horse's potential, we limit their desire to try new things, and it actually makes everyone's jobs much more difficult. And I know this is kind of like a big, but this is connection. It's really, for me, the entire training system is based on this, and it's easy to get distracted by the things that happen when you don't become distracted from training properly through connection, because it will cause problems with the horse. It will cause mistakes, and people who ride to prevent mistakes are not truly training horses. We are either catch riding, or we're allowing the horses to train us, which, hey, if that's the relationship you enjoy with your horse, then by all means. But when it comes to high performance and true dressage sport, understanding that keeping the horse between the leg and the hand makes life more difficult physically for these horses, and it is our job to make sure that mentally they don't reach a point where they stop trying. And this is, I think, the main confusion people have in their heads. They go, great, yeah, even Charlotte talks about these short reins. This must be a really great idea. And then they try it and they feel, I'm choking my horse. Oh, she can't go forward. Oh, he can't go forward. I'm doing something wrong. And this is where people get misguided into thinking that because it's difficult for the horse, or they don't choose the most difficult way the first time, that now we have to change what we're doing in the saddle. And boundaries are necessary in dressage and in moving up the levels, and this is why when it's done correctly, we see horses change shape from a young horse at training, sometimes an old horse at training level, who's rather long, and as they get towards the Grand Prix, you know, they become more of a, and I don't like to think of them as a square, but more of like a ball. And if they're not given shape, like we talked about the sink, where you stick the plug in the drain, you're not creating anything. So we can add gas all day long. We can go faster in the hind legs, but as long as we're letting it out the front, we haven't captured anything. And that's not to say the hand ever pulls back, ever pulls back. But a short hand, if I am teaching or whether I'm riding, it becomes very obvious if that hand comes back, I can see it. And even if my own hand wants to resist, it would have to be a very dramatic move for me to bring my hand this way towards the saddle. But when the rein is long, too long, which it is probably 95% of the times when I'm teaching or walking around a show, and that rein is too long, in order for the rider to create any type of contact between their hand and the bit, now we are sometimes forced to bring our hands back. And even though the pressure on the mouth might not be any different than when you take it on a short rein, it's a much different feel for the horse. And that's why horses are happy to go around all day long on a long rein, and the hands are back like this, and their nose is down, and they're heavy, not strong, heavy, because they're down this way. They're happy to do that. It's no work for their back. And then you think, well, I shorten my reins. I really have no more weight in my hand. Now why won't my horse go? And this is where I think a lot of the training problems and frustrations for riders come from, is that they feel it creates frustration in the horses. And you're not wrong, it is. We just have to really be clear in how we deal with that frustration in learning. And I don't know, those are a little bit some of my major ideas when it comes to connection. And maybe we can kind of open it up into a bigger conversation if people have questions, or if we want to talk about bits or other ideas. I'm happy to, yes?
Take your discussion of connection into throughness.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take the idea of connection into throughness, which is also a very overused and misunderstood term in our sport. People are often misguided by being able to create a certain shape in the horse and calling this throughness. And for me, throughness can only be achieved when you have real connection. It's like this rubber band. If I give my hand, my horse will take. If I don't give my hand, my horse doesn't stop, but it's still propelling within itself. And this throughness idea, for me, the most true way to test if it's real is through transitions. And throughness is not necessarily the shape of a neck. Sometimes a horse needs to be ridden low. Sometimes they need to be ridden high. Depends on the horse, depends on the reasons, depends on that horse's particular training issues. However, that horse finds things easy, for example. If a horse finds things easiest, his way of going around the pile of dirt is to throw his head straight up and get the job done, well then that's okay. But I might encourage this horse in his everyday work to be a little more stretching. than another horse who his easiest way to go around the pile of dirt is to tuck his nose between his knees and look like I've been doing horrible things to him at home, okay? Yeah, they humble us, right? But the test of throughness for me is not rather shape, but it's saying to myself, what's possible? In this walk, could I pee off? From this walk, could I canter? From this walk, could I do a turn on the haunches? From this walk, could I halt? What is possible? And if all of those things are possible, then I say to myself, I have throughness in walk. If I go to piaffe, can I get out of it? Can I go to passage? Can I do a piaffe halt? Can I do a piaffe reinback? Can I do a piaffe pirouette? And these ideas are where I say my horse is truly through, is when I'm not limited. I call it being held hostage by your horse, that you kind of make this deal and you say, okay, great, I won't touch the right rein and you just don't buck me off, okay? And this is another way that we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. And throughness is tricky, but I think it's often lost when people say, I got the piaffe or I got the flying change and that's enough for me. You know, and I say, well, great, I got the flying change. Now is it a flying change that's quality enough for me to make a tempi? If it's not good enough anymore. And this is where, that to me is throughness, is knowing that there's nothing that's not possible. And so every day in training, I warm my horse up, and that means checking on what he already knows. And then I say that day, what's not possible? Is it not possible for me to move him off of my left leg? Is it not possible for me to make that piaffe halt? I say, where is my limit? You know, what is not possible? And that is the thing that I train.
And that changes.
Every day it changes.
Every day, yes.
Yep. Yes.
What is sales writing? Like, I mean, I've seen it, but
It's horrible.
it's not connection, is it? It's holding and running, but it's not.
What do you mean? The
it's
question
not
is, what is sales riding? You mean riding horses in a sales barn?
But when you see it, so there is it. Are they connected? Are they through? They got that big flashy movement.
You've got to.
I can't ride it. I know
Yeah.
I can't, but you probably could. But
Well, and you've got to ask yourself, and I ride, especially lately, a lot of sale horses, hundreds and hundreds. And I tell you, I haven't vetted most of them, okay? Because when I get on, they might be going in a show ring trot. They're produced to impress you,
Yes.
right? To make you say, that's worth 6 figures,
yes,
okay? But you get on, and if from that amazing extended trot that 4-year-old has, if I can't make a simple trot and have the same feeling that he's taking me that I have in the extension on this 4-year-old, then that's not good for me. Again, because that's not possible. If the feeling is only possible in that big trot, then and it's not possible in the simple trot, then I need to work on the trot somewhere in between where I've almost lost the feeling, but I can still maybe improve it. And so again, when it comes to it's a skill. You know, auction riders, same thing. It doesn't necessarily mean, and you can watch a lot of these videos. Clip My Horse is an amazing resource now, YouTube. We can see all these top horses. Yeah. And I say to myself, you know, I'm going to get bumped out of the top 10 in the world. Oh my God. And you watch these horses, and then what happens with them? Nothing.
right.
Because it's not actual training, okay? It's showmanship, right? Same way we go into the arena. Even if it feels terrible, don't you want to give me an 8 for it? It feels horrible, you know? But that's a different job, you know? And so, and it's an important one for a lot of people's businesses. It just depends on how you want to spend your time and where you're comfortable making your money. Other questions? Yes.
What do you recommend for horses that naturally want to get short in the neck? Because I'm trying to train my horse collection. We're going to 3rd level. And so I shorten my reins, and she just wants to be right here, and she can do everything I ask of her.
Yep.
But I don't feel like I have a horse in front of me.
Yeah. And so this is a lot like my top horse. Oh, his neck is so short. I guarantee you we do nothing terrible to this horse. He's very soft in the mouth, and when he's nervous, he's a little bit like a turtle, okay? And these horses, and this was a game changer in my training. I have been training for a while with this horse. Everything felt nice. You know, people would die for a horse that feels that way in the hand. But the thing you have to understand is, like we're talking about, this good kind of resistance. And these horses who are like that don't have a natural pull in them. And so a lot of times what I see is people don't want you to think that they're riding their horse's roll cur at home. So they give their rein and they try to run their horses to it. And I don't know, like praying that their horse just maybe has this bright, I should hold the bit. I should probably take this bit in my mouth and lift my back and use my hind leg harder than I already am. It's not, we have to a little bit show them what they want. And they might not want it at first, but that's our job to convince them to buy what we're selling, right? And so in that way with the horses with the short neck, the first thing that we have to do to achieve when it comes to shape that we want, for the bit to actually be functionable, they have to learn how it works. And so even if teaching them to hold the contact, the feel that you're holding with your hand, means that the neck gets even shorter, this scares people, right? And we spend so much time in our sport judging others, and we're worried people are going to judge us. But the horse has to learn how that bit works, so that when you open your fingers, they take the bit, right? And so with a horse that likes to hide, we have to teach them to pull. And that doesn't mean I pull on them, but I have to hold the bit a little bit how I wish they would one day hold the bit. And teach them to go like that a little bit, even if they're still short in the neck. Teaching them to hold that bit where it's a nice way that works for the riding. And teaching them to a little bit drive into it with their hind legs. And then hopefully when we give our hand or open the finger, they maintain that pull. But we can't just run around hoping that they have this great idea. It becomes a little bit that you have to, fill up that sink. You have to create that boundary in front and work her into it until you get the good pull. And then we can let her out a little bit, and expecting it might be this much.
So you wouldn't be concerned if for a little while she stayed there just to learn?
No, it's a very, like I said, people are judgmental, and the short necks are a big controversy, but some horses just go this way. And it can be an equal challenge to get the horse to pull as it is for the horse who wants to run around like a giraffe, okay? They're equally as difficult to fix. But the horse has to learn first to pull. And they're not going to have this magic idea if we don't show them how that feels. Even if by creating more contact than they like, you can expect she's going to get even shorter. But we have to show her the feel if she's ever going to learn how the bit actually works. Oh, now we have hands everywhere. Yeah, back here.
So my mare, she's beautiful and short coupled, and she's powerful. She's an energizer bunny, but she's hard in the mouth, really hard in the mouth. So I've gotten really kind, those mutual bits.
Yep.
I got the D-ring and Hope came over and fixed everything, and everything's the right size. But, we recently found out that, her angles were kind of off, even though to the eye, and I have a very good farrier, that everything looked perfect to the eye. I said x-ray her feet just to make sure, and everything was wrong. So, from when I got her till now, she sort of went backwards. And she's gotten very strong in her mouth.
Yeah.
And she's like this. And I want to shorten everything.
Yeah, of course you do.
Really. And so my trainer's saying, no, don't let her go. And you know what? I'm finding that really, no, I want to shorten. And I find that it's better when I do shorten, but she's strong.
Yeah, and a horse who's strong, you have to be particularly careful about giving them too much rein. Because a horse who likes the pressure on the bit and they have all this space, where else are they going to take it? Okay, they're going to fill it up somewhere. And the other thing I challenge people with, two things about that idea, horses who are tough in the mouth, which some of them swear to you, just like the one who's short and really soft, some of them are born not that way. And so 2 things. Number 1, I teach the horses just like I do on my leg, pressure and release. If I touch, you give. If you don't give, I can keep that feel, just like the mare who ran backwards at 100 miles an hour. I guarantee you there's nothing more in my hand than would alarm most of you. But for her, it was alarming. And the horses who don't care about that, I use the phrase, as much as necessary, as little as possible. Same if they're dull on the sides. If you kicked my top horse the way I have to sharpen up some of these other ones, you couldn't touch him for 2 weeks. Okay.
You have another younger horse with 2 or 3 coming along that will fill the shoes of Diddy when he finally retires.
Yeah, okay, so about filling Diddy's shoes, which are size 5. They're big. We're working on it. I just found a very interesting horse in Colorado. And like I said, I've ridden hundreds and hundreds of sale horses in the past 2 years. It's a challenge to find something, and I like to train the horses at a younger age. Should we all stop and dance? So for me, that's the fun part, and then to find a young one that hasn't been overproduced so young that that their brain isn't totally fried, and getting it before the training has gone a different way than my own. A price that I think is reasonable, which is really not reasonable when you think about it. But I guess reasonable for horses, and then that passes the vet, it's less than a needle in a haystack. So I do, and I'll probably buy a couple more foals this year, which I haven't done. We've been building a barn, so bank account is limited. But I do enjoy buying foals and starting that myself, and then if they work out for me, that's great. If they don't, unfortunately, heartbreaking for me, has to be for sale. We haven't gone down that road yet, so I have to be questioned. But I do. I have a 4-year-old and some other, we'll see how interesting horses. Yeah.
I have a question. Yes. The training in snaffle versus training in a double at your level on, let's say, Diddy. Are you actually riding in a double versus a snaffle?
Okay, I'm only going to answer this question if everyone promises not to tell Debbie McDonald. So it's a question about how much I ride my top horse in a snaffle versus a double. He is, like I said, super sensitive. So most of the year he goes in a snaffle. When he's not in competition, like after hopefully we make it to Tryon, we make the team for that, he'll have a big long break. And then I'll put him back in the snaffle until probably our first lesson with Debbie in the fall. But then because he is sensitive, he will stay in the double all through show season on days that we work. Just because for him, the change isn't helpful.
Right.
And takes him a day. He can go right into the snaffle. But then when I put him back in the double, it's a day of him, just kind of fussing around. And it's not a problem, but it just, we keep it that way through show season. And I had a lesson I was teaching this morning, and a client who's been out of the show ring for a couple of years. She always rides her horse in the snaffle, but she wants to put the double on, and I said, sure, let's put it on tomorrow. We'll see how it goes, and then you have to pick, because we're not fussing around back and forth in the last 2 weeks before the show. You've been out of the ring for 2 years. You don't need to be, adding extra ingredients to the pot because you think it doesn't taste good enough. Yeah. More questions from anybody? Don't be shy. Yeah.
How long do you give your horses that is shown downtime?
The question was, how much downtime do my show horses really get? And people always think I'm lying about this, but the truth is, I had a horse who went to developing championships last year. And after that trip, he had 2 weeks where he just went to turnout and back in the barn. And my top horse, because he's more ambitious than most of the rest, he'll tell me when he needs to go back to work. So actually, To be honest, again, you guys cannot tell Debbie McDonald. He has not been ridden since the last show. Because I'm thinking ahead towards Paris. So when I get back on him, which will be on Friday, and already we've had to do some things. He's been lunging a little bit because he starts banging on the gates, and he tells me, you know, he needs a little exercise. But I do believe in downtime and serious downtime for the horses. Yeah. Yes?
You said you buy foals. What is the main thing you look for? Breeding or a certain look?
What do I look for when I buy foals? It's hard to say. They're all so cute. I do, and they change so much as they get older. But hopefully in a foal, you're able to see, or a young horse, it doesn't have to be a foal, even if they're under the age of 3, not saddle broke. Hopefully you can see 3 good paces. The last foals I bought, they both had exceptional walks. The rest of it I can kind of live with. And you obviously don't know their personality yet either. Some of these American breeders spend a lot of time with their foals, and they can tell you, you know, that one's a little pushy, that one's kind of a pushover. But sometimes you get these horses from Europe that haven't been handled much, and so it's a gamble. And maybe not one I would recommend if you don't have the ability to train something up and sell it if it's not exactly what you were hoping for. Yeah. I guess we have a little raffle.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so what is this? It's hyaluronic acid, joint supplement for your horses.
That's fine, you're good.
Should we pull something out?
It's not fair though.
We did mix them up.
Chris, if you can't spell your name properly and neatly, then you're not winning the prize. Chris?
Very good. Congratulations. Thank you.
Our next prize, we'll take a little baggie Alpha Omega and Solomon.
One back.
Rhea Kilker.
It's her birthday.
It goes to the horses. We have a big bucket of rice flax. There's a nice sweater in here. Right, it's gonna be cold this week. So, Elizabeth Hart.
Coming up. Thank you.
Another bag of lovely Triple Crown. Susan Borschland.
Congratulations.
Oh, is that what this is? Okay, so, you guys heard me talk a little bit how we've been building. One of the big parts that was an arena.
and I had a completely horrible experience. We ended up building my arena twice. And the second time, I was so thankful for this company here who came in and saved the day. And this is Premier Equestrian. And so what's inside this box is a sand testing kit. We were building from scratch, but they also will be able to take a sample of your existing footing, and you can send it to them, and they will for free tell you an additive that can really improve whether it's your drainage or your rebound or your stabilization. And they can tell you what you can do, and it can be very affordable. You might be surprised. And so we'll pick a winner, and then we have some other exciting news about equestrian. This is Rebecca Cohen.
I'm Rebecca Cohen's mommy. I will gladly accept for Rebecca. And Thank you.
Rebecca.
Rebecca's going to be so happy.
So for those of you who might also be interested, Premier Equestrian has so generously offered that if you give them a call and you say Laura Graves and Show Chic, they will send you a free test kit.
Very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
On the 27th is Laura King, so please join us for that next shop talk.